He had learned early that invisibility was less about technology and more about status. The ship could bend light, distort signals, and vanish from entire star systems without leaving a trace, yet somehow the most effective cloaking device aboard was a gray uniform and a job no one respected. When he passed through the long corridors, polished to a mirror sheen that reflected entire constellations from the hull's projection grid, no one looked twice. Which was good, because if they had, they might have asked why a human was still here. He dragged the cleaning unit behind him, a stubborn machine that hummed like it had opinions. "I'm telling you," he muttered, "this is a perfectly reasonable amount of dust for a vessel that hasn't landed in ever." The machine beeped in quiet disagreement and sprayed a fine mist that dissolved microscopic particles and, occasionally, his patience. The silence came first, not the usual quiet of space, not the distant hum of engines or the whisper of energy flowing through living metal walls. This was abrupt, like someone had taken the entire ship and pressed pause. The lights dimmed, then steadied into a colder hue. Doors sealed with a soft, almost polite click, as if apologizing for the inconvenience of trapping everyone inside. He straightened slowly, the cleaning unit bumping into his leg like it wanted reassurance he didn't have. "That's new," he said, because stating the obvious felt like a solid plan in a crisis. A corridor display flickered to life beside him, symbols cascading across its surface in a language he had been specifically not taught. Helpful, very helpful. He leaned closer anyway, squinting like that might unlock hidden understanding. "Right," he nodded after a moment. "Yes, I also agree with all of that." Then came the sound, not loud, not urgent, just there, a faint harmonic pulse drifting through the walls like a heartbeat that didn't belong to the ship. He followed it without thinking, because curiosity had always been his greatest strength and his most consistent mistake. The sealed door at the end of the corridor hesitated before opening, as if unsure it should. He stepped inside and immediately regretted every decision that had led him to this point. 4 of them, fragile-looking, though he had already learned that appearances aboard this ship were often a lie waiting to embarrass you. They lay within a containment field that shimmered faintly, their forms unlike anything he had seen up close. Their skin held a soft, shifting luminescence, like distant stars trying to decide whether to be seen. And their ears, long, delicate, extending gracefully from their heads, twitched in slow, almost thoughtful movements. One of them turned its head. He froze. There was no fear in its gaze, no confusion. Just a calm, steady awareness that made him feel like he had just walked into the middle of something important without an invitation. "Well," he said after a long moment, because silence suddenly felt like the worst option, "this seems official." The containment field flickered, then dissolved entirely. He blinked. No, that's not how this works. There are procedures, there are definitely procedures." He looked around for someone more qualified, which was everyone, and found no one. The smallest of them made a soft sound, a gentle pulse that echoed the rhythm he had heard in the corridor. Its long ears tilted toward him, as if focusing. He pointed at himself, just to be clear. "You've made a mistake. I clean things. Occasionally I argue with machines. I am not." He paused as the infant reached out, its small hand closing around his finger with surprising strength. "Qualified," he finished weakly. The cleaning unit rolled in behind him and stopped, its sensors adjusting to the new presence. It emitted a soft chime, one he had never heard before, almost approving. "Oh, don't start," he muttered. "This is already a bad idea." The infant didn't let go. None of them cried. None of them made demands. They simply watched him, their quiet presence filling the room in a way that felt far too large for something so small. He exhaled slowly, looking from one to the other, then back at the tiny hand gripping his finger like it had made a decision. "All right," he said at last. "But just so we're clear, if this goes terribly wrong, I'm blaming all of you." The first night, if it could be called night, on a ship that ignored suns taught him 2 important things. First, the children did not sleep the way anything sensible should. Second, he was now responsible for that problem. He sat on the floor, back against a smooth wall that pulsed faintly with energy, watching them rearrange reality in small, inconvenient ways. One had decided that gravity was more of a suggestion, drifting a few centimeters above the ground with a look of quiet satisfaction. Another tapped the floor rhythmically, each touch sending soft ripples of light outward, like the ship itself was reacting to a secret code. The smallest one, the one still holding onto his finger whenever possible, seemed content to simply observe, which somehow felt more unsettling than the floating. "Okay," he said, rubbing his eyes, "we need rules." 4 pairs of eyes glowing faintly in the dim light turned toward him. "No floating during whatever this is," he gestured vaguely. "No talking to the walls unless they talk back first. And absolutely no." He paused as one of them reached toward the air and pulled something invisible into view, a thin strand of shimmering energy that twisted like a curious snake. "That," he finished. The strand snapped out of existence. He stared at the empty space. "I'm going to assume that was harmless." The cleaning unit beeped behind him. "Not helpful," he said immediately. "Feeding them had been worse." The storage systems, once accessed through a series of polite requests and increasingly desperate button presses, had offered options that were less food and more scientific mystery. One container had pulsed, another had hummed. A third had attempted to move away when opened, which felt like a clear sign it did not want to be eaten and should probably be respected. In the end, he chose the least alarming option, which turned out to glow softly and dissolve into a fine mist when exposed to air. The children reacted instantly, their long ears lifting as they gathered around. The mist shifted toward them as if guided, flowing gently into their reach. "Right," he said slowly. "Of course it does that." One of them sneezed, a tiny, unexpected sound that caused a brief flicker in the ship's lighting. He blinked up at the ceiling. "You're joking." The light steadied, though he couldn't shake the feeling that the ship had just adjusted. Hours, he thought they were hours, passed like that, small discoveries, smaller victories. He learned that the one who floated preferred warmth, drifting closer to heat sources like a very quiet, slightly glowing moth. The one who tapped the floor seemed fascinated by patterns, repeating sequences until even the walls responded in soft harmonics. The observer remained exactly that, watching him with an intensity that suggested he was being carefully evaluated for long-term usefulness. "Good news," he announced at one point, mostly to himself. "No one has exploded." The smallest one made a soft sound, almost like agreement. "Don't take that as a challenge," he added quickly. At some point, exhaustion caught up with him. He didn't remember deciding to close his eyes, only the moment he opened them again to find the children gathered closer than before. The floating one had settled beside him, gravity apparently back in favor. The rhythmic tapping had stopped. Even the observer seemed quieter. The smallest still held his finger. He shifted slightly, careful not to disturb them, and let out a slow breath. "All right," he murmured, voice softer now. "We made it through one cycle. That counts as something." The wall behind him pulsed gently, its energy steady and calm. For the first time since the silence had fallen over the ship, nothing felt like it was about to go wrong, which he thought was probably a bad sign. By the time the ship decided to stop pretending everything was fine, he had already accepted that normal was no longer a useful concept. So when the lights sharpened, the air stilled, and every surface seemed to align itself with quiet precision, he just looked up and sighed. "Of course," he said, "right when I was getting used to things." The children reacted instantly, not with fear, not with confusion, but recognition. Their long ears lifted in perfect unison, angled toward something distant yet unmistakable. The smallest one released his finger for the first time, and that felt bigger than all the alarms the ship refused to sound. "Well," he muttered, flexing his hand as if it suddenly belonged to him again, "that's not ominous at all." The corridor outside unfolded before him without command, each door opening in sequence as though guiding him forward. He followed, because at this point, resisting the ship felt like arguing with gravity, possible in theory, embarrassing in practice. She was already there, no announcement, no guards, just presence. He stopped walking. She stood at the far end of the hall, still in a way that made the entire ship feel like it had adjusted itself around her. She looked human at first glance, tall, composed, but the difference was unmistakable. Her long ears arched elegantly, catching the faint light, marking her as something far beyond anything he could pretend to understand. "Okay," he said quietly to himself, "this is where I get politely erased." Behind him, small footsteps, light, quick, very familiar. The children moved past him without hesitation, crossing the distance as if pulled by something deeper than instinct. They surrounded her, their movements certain, their silence filled with meaning he couldn't hear but somehow felt. She knelt, not like a queen, not like anything he had expected. Her hands moved gently, checking them, touching their faces, their hair, the delicate curve of their ears. For a moment, the vast weight of whatever she was seemed to fold into something simpler, something personal. He shifted awkwardly, suddenly unsure where to look. I kept them alive, he offered, because silence felt dangerous again. Mostly, they helped a lot, especially with the not dying part. One of the children made a soft sound, almost like a quiet correction. All right, fine, he amended. They did most of the work. She stood slowly, her attention turning to him. It was not an angry gaze, not cold, just precise. Like she was seeing everything at once, including the parts of him he usually kept hidden behind bad jokes and a cleaning unit with attitude. You are not of this ship, she said. No, he agreed. That part has been made very clear to me, repeatedly. A pause. You remained. He glanced at the children, then back at her. There wasn't anyone else. That is not an answer. He hesitated, then exhaled. They needed someone. The words settled between them, simple and stubborn. Something shifted in her expression, not quite approval, but not far from it either. The children gathered closer to him now, not leaving her, but not leaving him either. One reached for his sleeve. Another leaned lightly against his side. The smallest, after a brief moment of consideration, took his finger again. He blinked. Oh, now you remember me. A faint sound, soft, almost like amusement, passed through the group. The queen watched this, her gaze thoughtful. They have bonded. Yeah, he said, glancing down at them. They do that, very aggressively. Silence again, but it felt different now, less like judgment, more like decision. You will remain, she said. He straightened. I will. You have altered what was expected. He nodded slowly. I do that sometimes, usually by accident. For the first time, there was something unmistakable in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close enough that he noticed. The ship's lights softened. The tension that had wrapped itself around everything since the silence first fell finally loosened, like a breath being released after being held far too long. He looked at the children, at their quiet confidence, their strange, impossible presence, and then back at her. Just so we're clear, he said, I still have no idea what I'm doing. One of the children tugged his hand. Another tilted their head, ears flicking in a way he had learned meant something like reassurance. The queen turned, the moment settling into something steady, something certain. You will learn, she said. He let out a small laugh, shaking his head. Yeah, he murmured, I guess I will. And for once, the unknown didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something he already belonged to. The first official day of his new position began with a uniform that actually fit and a title he still suspected was a joke. Royal Caretaker Liaison, he read out loud, turning the sleeve slightly as if it might explain itself. That's not cleaning. The cleaning unit beside him beeped in what he chose to interpret as betrayal. Don't look at me like that, he said. You knew I was going places. It beeped again, louder this time. All right, fair, I didn't either. The ship no longer ignored him. That was the first real difference. Doors opened faster, systems responded without hesitation, and more importantly, people, actual, important, very well-dressed beings, stopped and looked at him. Not through him, not past him. At him. He did not enjoy it. One of them, tall and composed with sharply angled ears, paused as he walked by, their gaze lingering just long enough to make him consider whether he had accidentally offended an entire empire by existing incorrectly. He raised a hand. Hello, I'm still me. They said nothing, but the look shifted slightly, like confusion had replaced dismissal. Progress, he muttered, continuing on. The children had adapted faster than he had. Of course they had. They moved through the ship now with a quiet confidence that bent everything around them. Systems adjusted. Pathways cleared. Even the air felt different when they were near, like the ship itself recognized them as something fundamental. They still followed him. Not constantly, not in the uncertain way from before, but enough that he never quite felt alone. One would appear beside him without warning. Another would tug at his sleeve just as he started overthinking something, and the smallest, still the most stubborn, had not entirely given up the habit of holding his finger when it decided that was necessary. He had stopped questioning it. You know, he said one day as they gathered in one of the quieter chambers, I'm starting to think I might actually be good at this. One of them tilted their head, ears flicking. Yes, I heard it too, he added quickly. Very suspicious statement. A soft ripple passed through the walls like the ship itself disagreed. Oh, come on, he said, looking up. You've seen my work. I kept them alive. A pause. Mostly, he admitted. The queen observed more than she spoke. He noticed that early. She appeared when necessary, silent and precise, her presence shifting everything without effort. But she watched constantly him, the children, the way they interacted. He caught her doing it more than once. "You're evaluating me," he said one time, because pretending not to notice felt pointless. "I am observing," she replied. "Right," he nodded, evaluating with better wording. She didn't deny it. He leaned back slightly, arms folding. "And, am I passing?" Her gaze moved briefly to the children, then back to him. "They are stable, they are changed." He followed her glance. One of them was currently attempting to stack objects that did not want to be stacked, bending space just enough to make it possible. Another watched, clearly judging the technique. "Yeah," he said softly, "they are." "You influenced this?" He considered that, then shrugged lightly. "I showed them how to make bad decisions and call it learning. They improved it." For a moment, silence, then, unexpectedly, the faintest shift in her expression. Not quite amusement, but close enough. Time passed differently now, not stretched thin and uncertain, but steady, purposeful. He learned more about them, about the ship, about a species that had once seemed too distant to understand. He learned their patterns, their signals, the subtle movements of their long ears that spoke louder than words. And they learned him, not as an outsider, not as something temporary, but as something theirs. One evening, if it could still be called that, he found himself in the same chamber where everything had begun. The memory felt distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. The panic, the uncertainty. The absolute certainty that he was not qualified. He looked at his hand. No one was holding it. He smiled slightly. "Look at that," he murmured. "I've been promoted from necessary object to optional presence." A small movement beside him, the smallest one, stepped closer, glancing up at him, ears tilting in that familiar, thoughtful way. He raised an eyebrow. "Oh no, don't start this again." It reached out, paused. Then, instead of taking his finger, it simply rested its hand lightly against his. Different, not dependence, choice. He exhaled slowly, something quiet settling into place inside him. "Yeah," he said softly, "that's better." The ship hummed around them, steady and alive, not silent anymore, not empty. Behind them, at a distance she did not close, the queen watched, not with doubt, not with question, but with something resolved. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. For the first time since he had stepped onto this ship, he wasn't wondering if he belonged. He already knew, and this time invisibility was no longer an option.